Pinocchio Project. I'm your host, Mitch Friedman, and today we're going to be talking about what's rooted in an old expression that I learned fairly early. I guess maybe my mom and or dad liked to use it, particularly when I was ignoring something that was right on my radar screen that I needed to pay attention to, whether it was schoolwork, chores around the house, some other responsibilities or impending crises that I didn't seem to want to focus on. And the expression for my behavior was, Mitch, you're just whistling past the graveyard. You're whistling past the graveyard. Have you ever heard that one? So I'm gonna launch this episode with sort of a remake on that. So the definition of whistling past the graveyard is to pretend to be calm, cheerful, and confident in an effort to reassure myself or others as I deny or ignore a threat or a problem. To pretend to be calm, cheerful, and confident in an effort to reassure myself or others as I deny or ignore a threat or a problem. And today I'm going to talk about another context, not the graveyard that we've been whistling past for several decades now, but we've actually been whistling past the maternity ward, or better yet, a vacant, growingly empty maternity ward. And so I've titled this episode, Whistling Past the Maternity Ward. And I was prompted to talk about this today. I had some other things in mind, and believe me, I've got like a million prompts and outlines that are in process for these podcasts, because there's a lot of ideas out there, and as we know, ideas have consequences. Good ideas on human flourishing bring human flourishing. Bad ideas on human flourishing bring human degrading. And there are a ton of ideas offering human flourishing if we will just simply buy into them and behave according to them. And so our goal on the Pinocchio Project is to vet these ideas through a biblical grid, a biblical worldview, to determine whether or not they can deliver on their promises. Today, I was reading the paper. And that's kind of the way we read now. Remember the days when we would sit back and we'd be folding and you drink our coffee and put the paper down to talk? Well, right now, this is how I read the paper. So I was reading the New York Times today. Something comes into my inbox. If you're a subscriber to the Times, you get something called The Morning, and it comes in really early. And for me, it came in about 5:23 a.m. Central Time. And in the subject line was a new child care mandate. And this is what prompted my need to come into the Pinocchio Project environment today and discuss the problem of having children, the problem with children, the problem of children. But the subject line actually was a bit promising before I opened it. A new child care mandate. I'm all for taking care of children in the ways that are appropriate and responsible for me as the one having children. And so here's a bit of the opening from the morning send from the New York Times in my inbox. Good morning, says the New York Times, and I would like to say back to them, good morning to you. And here is the launch into the story. President Biden used his limited leverage to help expand access to child care. This particular piece was written by German Lopez on today, March 3rd, 2023. And here is the opening paragraph. Millions of Americans work less than they used to, or not at all, and here's why. Because they can't find someone to take care of their children. The lack of adequate child care not only keeps parents from trying to earn a paycheck, but damages the economy overall. It's one of the biggest reasons that American companies are struggling to find workers. Now, this is a proposition for you to consider, but it's couched as a truth claim about the current state of employment or lack thereof, or desire for employment but inability to work in these United States. I have some other ideas on why there are fewer workers available, But Herman Lopez has a particular set of ideas in this agenda to describe what President Biden is doing in policymaking to help us out so that we can get back to work and not do damage to the economy. So you see immediately that children are juxtaposed as a problem over and against a flourishing economy. And this is not so subtle anymore, and I'm going to develop this a bit as we go on. This is what I would call the fruit, not fully born yet, but this is a fruit of an antinatal culture. Antinatalism is the belief or the philosophy, we'll talk about it more in a minute, that overall having children is not beneficial to human society. And I can't think of anything more ludicrous than that. If you say that having children is not beneficial to life overall, then try to do life without a constant regeneration of the next generation by having children. This is just so symptomatic of the roots that we've developed in the West, and really in particularly in America, that's contrary to or even hostile to the idea of families having growing numbers or maybe even just basic replacement numbers of children. You see the moral language here. The lack of adequate child care not only keeps parents from trying to earn a paycheck, so just the basic sustenance of paying the bills and doing what's necessary to stay alive is being restricted by these kids that we can't find care for. And I could say a lot about the law of subsidiarity, but I'll just say this. Children are the parents' responsibility. Children are the parents' responsibility over and against any other consideration. But when your considerations and your priorities change to what the cultural mandate demands, and especially when it comes to keeping the economic engine running, which we've all drunk that Kool-Aid down, then we are moving from basic subsidiarity and first responsibility for children to some one-off so that we can find our way into more productive pursuits. It's one of the biggest reasons that American companies are struggling to find workers. Again, I could do 2 more podcasts on just why nobody's working right now. I'm not quite sure this is at the top of the list. Just the opening line. I don't want to leave this. Millions of Americans work less than they used to, or not at all. Like I'm not working. I can't work because they can't find someone to take care of their children. What is the primary work? The primary work is to take care of our children. That's a Christian worldview. Children are a heritage from the Lord. We are called to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That mandate still exists from our origin story in Genesis 1 and 2. And overall, over the past 50 to 60 years, children are not seen as a blessing to be cared for, enjoyed, and nurtured so that the next generation can prosper. They're seen more as a problem to be solved. And so this, to me, while you would say, Mitch, this is not an example of antinatalism because these children exist. No, but it's an example of the overarching saturation in a bias against children because of the obstacles they are to what's really important, such as both parents working and contributing to a thriving economy by being consumers and by being contributors to the economic engine. So here is the further development of Herman's article. The answer to this problem is found in salvation by the state, which you see in the headline. President Biden used his limited leverage to help expand access to child care. And what President Biden is actually doing is he's using government contracts as a point of leverage to demand that companies, in particular chip manufacturers right now, in order to get government funding, President Biden is proposing that no chip manufacturer will be eligible for federal funds unless they agree to provide child care for their workers. So the subsidiarity is that the company will provide child care for the primary responsibility of the parents. So here's here's the case for the policy. And, subtly, again, we moved into this secular idea that somehow the state is the answer to our problems. That's the second and third worldview question. What's wrong with this place is the second question, and what can be done to fix what's wrong is the third one. Or that's really the salvation question. How can we be saved from this problem? And more, the answer is not lying in the initiative and responsibility of the individual, but the actions of the state. And we keep giving away by degrees our freedoms, rightly said, our liberties, rightly understood, and our own responsibilities, and we're abdicating those to the state. So here's the case for the policy. A lack of affordable childcare is a real problem in the U.S., experts agree. Across the country, there are simply two, and I'm going to try not to chuckle. Across the country, there are simply too few childcare workers for every family who needs them. The Bipartisan Policy Center found the lack of childcare is keeping up to millions of people out of the workforce, experts said. The chief executive of one chip manufacturer told CSNBC that affordable childcare has been a significant barrier to finding workers. Again, the whole tenor, the whole temperature of this article identifying the problem is that children are the obstacle keeping the United States economic machine from being all she can be, which is a priority over caring for children directly. And we have definitely bought the Kool-Aid church in America. The Brookings Institute, which is a nonprofit public policy organization out of Washington, D.C. I'm going to switch gears here and talk about the actual ongoing fruit of antinatalism over the past decades in our country. We've shown that we are antinatalist because we're having fewer and fewer babies, and there's a formula, a sort of a break-even point for what it means to keep a culture and a civilization healthy for the next generations, and that's called the population replacement rate. So as people age and leave the workforce and then ultimately pass away, they need to be cared for, and there needs to be at least a replacement number of children born into that culture or civilization, so that they can at least maintain where the population and the resources are, so that they can create income, they create wealth, they contribute not just taxes, they contribute their initiative. So the replacement rate is that break-even number, that this many children have to be born to replace this many people who are aging out, need care, and will ultimately die. And if you don't reach replacement rate, then the population shrinks, and along with the population shrinking, so does the economy, and so does the energy of that particular culture, because the youthful infusion of idealism and creativity all begins to wane as the population wanes. So on May 24th of 2021, the Brookings Institute filed some research under the banner, the headline, "Will the U.S. birth rate rebound?" And then they answered the question for us, probably not. So this is from May of 21. And this is from their report. The total fertility rate, quote unquote, which is a measure constructed from the data that we have gathered to estimate the average total number of children that a woman will ever have, fell from 2.12 in 2007 to 1.64 in 2020. So you may think that these are decimals that are insignificant, but they are very significant when broadcast over the total population of a culture or civilization or our country. 2.1 is the replacement rate. It's the basic replacement rate, 2.1 children per family or per woman who is capable of childbearing. It is now well below the fertility rate is well below 2.1, the value considered to be replacement fertility, which is the rate needed for the population to replace itself without immigration. And I've said this before, I think, on the Pinocchio Project, as we've talked about the replacement rate not being met, that we are supplementing our population deficit by immigration, and that there's jobs there. And I'm not going to get into the the legitimacy, illegitimacy of our immigration policy. That's a whole nother ball of wax. Has biblical connotation and framework considerations as well. But without this immigration, we would be seeing more of and feeling more of the pinch, quote unquote, of a growingly vacant maternity ward. This idea that the children are a problem to be solved instead of a blessing to be nurtured, enjoyed, and groomed for success in the next generation is actually just, it's insanity at its face. And it shows a marked myopia of self living in the present moment. There's another organization that I was accessing to just form these propositions here on today's Pinocchio Project. It's a group called 538. It's all the numbers written out, 5 written out, 30 written out, 8. And this organization is, again, a statistical analysis compiler. They use statistical analysis, hard numbers, and this is their language, to tell compelling stories about elections, politics, culture, sports, and science. And so this is also an article from a lady named Stephanie H. Murray, also an article from 2021. It was on June 9th from 538. And here's the title of the article. How low, it's the limbo, it's the birth rate limbo. How low can America's birth rate go before it's a problem? And I found this interesting. I think it was a fairly balanced approach. Both sides of the perspective equation on the falling birth rate being now supplemented by the global workforce, as long as the workforce that's coming in those particular countries aren't experiencing a lower birth rate. The fact is, every industrialized nation is experiencing a birth rate that's falling below replacement. Some of the most dire are Japan, China's on the way. So the perspective was, we know that this is a problem, but right now it's being supplemented by a global immigration, and bringing in specialty workers from other countries. And so the summary here for 538 was that we know that the differing perspectives on this issue leave us with two broad approaches to handling the challenges of low fertility. We can encourage people to have more children by, and here comes the state again, enacting policies that make parenting more attainable. I'm not even sure what that means. I mean, I think it's a balanced desire for two perspectives. But again, our default is to the state to create policy so that we can have more kids, it removes the primary first principles of what it means to have a family. And that's the desire of the parents in their understanding of what it means for us to fulfill our responsibility as parents, if we can. Now, obviously, there's married couples that can have kids, and there's other options for them, in adoption, etc. But this whole thing with the state answering the call and being our salvation has already shown to be a huge failure, for example, in China. For decades, China had a one-child policy so that parents could work and build the Chinese economic engine, because that was their goal, to be the preeminent economic power in the world. And so in order to make sure that parents had the most bandwidth possible for their hard-working contribution to the economic engine, they had a one-child policy. Well, that became entrenched, and we see all kind of horrors going on there. And anytime the natural order is violated for the sake of man-made rights and privileges and desires that are contrary to the human flourishing model that we have in the biblical text, which is the definition of what it means to do life well from generation to generation. Anytime that's violated, you see all kind of atrocities under that banner. But after decades of the one-child policy, China began to realize that they had their own fertility rate problem and their workforce was beginning to shrink. So they enacted policies to incentivize Chinese couples, Chinese families to have not one, but even two more kids. So we're up to 3. But you know what? The idea was so now entrenched in the lifestyle and the quote unquote freedoms and less responsibility and less complication and fewer sacrifices that come with fewer children. That was so much of an entrenched model in how the Chinese families in general thought that life was worth living with fewer children. That just became now standard. And even the Chinese incentivizing families to have more children is not working because now the human that desires maximum comfort and convenience and pleasure and opportunity and freedom of time sees this taking on of more children as something that is an obstacle to maximum enjoyment because we want minimum sacrifice and complication. So this, again, the default to the state, let me just continue. We can encourage people to have more children by enacting policies that make parenting more attainable. Or we can invest more in the people we've already got, both children and their parents. So everyone becomes a productive and capable adult. The good news is that many of the policies that help with the latter approach, that means make sure that both parents and their children become productive and capable adults. The good news is that many of the policies that help with that approach can also help with the former approach. Policies that support mothers in the workplace and ensure that all children have access to a good upbringing and education, for example, paid paternal leave, child allowances, and expanding access to high-quality child care, early childhood education, and higher education. Some of those things are good things. If you have to have child care, we want high quality. I think we like the idea of early childhood education. Sometimes it can be too early. And higher education also ease the financial strain of parenting. And so here's their summary. So although we don't know exactly how far the fertility rate can fall before it becomes a problem, and I would offer it's already a problem, and we're just sort of whistling past the growingly vacant maternity ward, the solutions may be more straightforward than we think. So that references policymaking and what the government will do to save us. So let me just close here and illustrate that what we're talking about are fruits. When we talk about flourishing, let's use the garden metaphor, which we use frequently. Flourishing, by definition, is healthy and vigorous growth, particularly as the result of a favorable environment. So that's like a garden metaphor. The favorable environment is the soil in the garden that's now compatible and conducive to the specific seed that will be sown. And so everything we see coming out of the soil and blooming and then becoming fruitful is the product of what's in the soil as the seed grows up into maturity. So there's fruit, and that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at fruit. The falling birth rate is a fruit. The demand for the state to answer these questions of the problem of children and their care is a fruit of this antinatalism as the soil. And antinatalism as the soil is producing all of these fruits that are hostile in ways that are nuanced, in ways that are overt towards having children and caring for them appropriately in the family unit. And church, we bought into this whole double income, knock yourself out, make sure your career is advancing as fast and far as it can, because that's what we believe is to be the purpose of our lives, is that self is actualized to the full extent. The soil is this this antenatal posture because we want other things more desperately or as a priority than we do the fulfillment of the command to be fruitful, fill the earth with image bearers who have been brought up appropriately by their parents. And ideas have consequences. So the root ideas behind the fruit of these falling birth rates and these cries for the state to save us is antinatalism. And so antinatalism is a philosophy, and you'd be surprised. I'm going to give you a couple of websites here, or at least one website, and I want you to look for yourself, and you'll be SMHing as I do often, shaking my head. Antinatalism is the belief that it is morally wrong or unjustifiable for people to have children. Morally wrong or unable to be justified that people have children. And we are sort of on that cusp of posture when we talk about the priority of the economy and adults working as the first principle of their purpose in life to build the economic engine. That makes it by implication unjustifiable to have children that impede or obstruct that main goal. And so I would call what's coming is the philosophical defenses of antinatalism, because anytime you propose something that is, I would say, that abrupt, morally wrong or unjustifiable to have children, then you need some philosophical, like some existential defense to make it seem to be a universal necessity. And so we're going to have this in the show notes. Here's an actual organization. It's a nonprofit. It's called stophavingkids.org. stophavingkids.org. And so this is the philosophical excerpt from stophavingkids.org on their Who Are We page or the About page. All societies and cultures heavily encourage and promote having kids. I don't agree with that, but this is how they posture their argument. This is in parentheses. Rather than caring for already existing lives and mitigating harm. Well, I already have questions. Harm? I'm all about caring for existing lives, but you make it mutually exclusive. Either I care for who's living or I bring more children in the world and cause harm. I don't get it. But let's continue this philosophical, quote unquote, defense of antinatalism. We, that Stop Having Kids, as a small movement, are trying to do what we can to disrupt the long-term detrimental buildup of social pressure to conform to unconsidered traditions, behaviors, and ways of thinking and living that don't take the implications of existence seriously enough. This is a logical contradiction, or it's illogical. The implications of existence, these are people who exist and don't want anybody else to exist in the next generation. We want to inspire people to question acquiescing to all societal norms and expectations. This is another deconstruction argument. Just deconstruct what is. Whatever it is, that's what progressivism is. Just deconstruct what is so we can make it better. We want to inspire people to question acquiescing to all societal norms and expectations. I just spent about 15 minutes describing the fact that in our society, it's not a norm to want to have children. So they've actually, they're saying things that are no longer true. It's an anachronism for them to say there's a lot of social pressure in this country to have kids. We want to inspire people to question acquiescing to all societal norms and expectations, especially the norm and expectation of procreation. We want people to understand that procreation is an ability, not an obligation, and that everyone has a right and valid reasons to not create more humans. We promote living authentically, fearlessly, confidently, honestly, thoughtfully, and compassionately. I have no idea why that last sentence is in there. And if it wasn't for the fact that they are very serious. And this antinatal idea is already deeply saturated in the soil of our culture. And we see the fruit springing up. I would just think this was laughable. Instead, I just shake my head and have to recognize that we are now moving so far afield from being influenced by just common and unquestioned Christian principles about what makes life worth living, that we have to connect the dots all over again. So that's a philosophical defense of antinatalism. Here's another. A man named David Benatar. In 2006, Benatar, who's a philosopher at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, in 2006, he wrote a book entitled Better Never to Have Been. And so you get the implications. Well, first of all, it doesn't make sense because I have to actually be in order to make a statement like, it's better that I never have been. See, that's kind of similar to Job. Oh, I rue the day that I was born. I rue the day that my mother gave me birth. So this is, even the book title is absolutely ludicrous and incongruous. He wrote a book called Better Never to Have Been, in which he argues the following 4 things. 1, coming into existence is always a serious harm. 2, procreation is always wrong. Well, I hope David's at least grateful to some degree that his mom isn't buying into his Kool-Aid. She's not drinking it. She didn't drink it. 3, it is wrong not to abort fetuses at the earliest stages of gestation. And 4, it would be better if, as a result of there being no new people, humanity became extinct. This is humanity writing about the benefits of extinct humanity. And how arrogant of someone in the land of the living insisting that no one else should have that opportunity. But these are seriously considered philosophers in this antinatalist understanding. And if you are just blown away, mind blown, I think that's okay briefly, but then you should commit yourself to understanding these arguments so you can offer better ideas to enslaved image bearers that these bad ideas are causing them all kinds of actual harm, especially when it comes to aborting fetuses. So these philosophies, I think, may be accepted at the academic level, but to me, it's just all virtue signaling. Because a virtue signal is something that I throw out there to make you think that I'm someone who is with it on the right side of history, and I'm deconstructing for the benefit of this generation. If there's no future generations in this particular lane, that's okay. But it's basically me just raising a flag and saying, hey, I agree, and I can add to the conversation without actually being someone who's in the trenches doing the hard work. I'm a simple man, and I said in this final installment here, may we please just put aside the virtue signaling of these philosophies. I want to argue that the soil, this saturated, prepared garden that takes root in these seeds and becomes the fruit of antinatalism, is just myopic self-centeredness, which is, takes us all the way back from a biblical worldview to the garden and our Declaration of Independence from our Creator. And there's some particular things that are going on right now. And so I just said the root idea of our antinatalism posture is myopic. That means short-sighted self-centeredness. Myopic in the sense of, I can't see the generation behind my own in my own life. Am I responsible to populate the future generations? I think so. I think that's my mandate. As long as I'm capable, and as long as I have the impulse to be married so I don't burn with passion, then I have now the responsibility from a biblical standpoint to further the cultural and creation mandates by helping to populate the earth with image bearers. That brings that brings him glory. That is to his exaltation. To have image bearers, that's part of the blessing in Genesis chapter 1. God blessed them and said to them, have dominion, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And it's just so short-sighted to somehow think that I don't have a responsibility beyond my own moment on this terrestrial ball. So I need to live it up. I need to experience max comfort, max convenience, and max pleasure, and minimum of sacrifice and complication. One of the things that we see as the fruit of this root of myopic self-centeredness is the cry of the Dink family. The Dink family, have you heard of the Dink family? Dual income, no kids, unless you want to call fur babies kids. It's an exploding demographic in our country, the Dinks. Dual income, that means both husband and wife work, and typically it's a couple that's well educated and makes great salaries, and they use all of that on themselves. The dual income, no kids family. It's actually I don't have TikTok, but I was in my reading. I see that there is an expanding place of influence for dinks on TikTok. Here's the cry of the Dink family. We want to do what we want to do, and we want to do it. And kids will get in the way of our lifestyle. So there's either a huge delay in having kids, or there's just no goal for having children at all. That's the Dinks. And again, I've said this before, anytime my life goal centers on max pleasure, max comfort, and max convenience, and minimum of sacrifice and complication, then I am showing myself to be the fruit of the root of myopic self-centeredness. And as followers of Jesus Christ, committed to human flourishing, we have a responsibility to promote natalism. We want to be pronatal, not antinatal. And so we have opportunity, because this is all around us. We have opportunity to have in our relationships conversations that call into question this illogical understanding that somehow we would be better off if we weren't populating the next generation. It makes no sense. We're cutting off the limb upon which we sit. And finally, the fruit of this myopic self-centeredness is the idea that our life goals must center on career advancement and success. And kids are actually a bottleneck on the ladder of my promotional arc. And church, we have drunk this Kool-Aid by the gallon, and we have participated, and we should repent. I think we'll be held accountable for our position, both philosophically, but more behaviorally, on how we promoted an antinatal reality in our own families, and how we offered better ideas to the culture enslaved by this antinatal. It's a black hole into shrinking economy, shrinking energy, minimizing of the glory of God, and missing out on the blessing and the privilege of growing kids into adults and assisting on that journey with them. Does it require much sacrifice? Oh yeah, and worth it. Does it require dealing with complication? Oh yeah, and it's worth it. Does it require humbling yourself over and over again? Oh yeah, and it's worth it. So the conclusion is, if the Pinocchio Project examines everyday ideas that promise human flourishing and determine whether or not they can deliver on their promises, the conclusion is having fewer babies does not promote human flourishing. And it's really, really bad for the next season of life in our particular culture, and then the next season beyond that. So we're all about babies. We are natalists. Say it with me. We are natalists. We're pronatal. For the Pinocchio Project, this is Mitch Friedman signing off.